The day was cold, though not so cold as to numb the senses. A gray light filtered through the high windows of the Red Keep's throne room, drifting across the polished floor in pale patches, leaving the corners wreathed in soft shadow. To Tyrion Lannister, the morning felt more somber than usual, and when he let his gaze drift along the towering pillars, he thought of the new forging of alliances that might transpire here. A hush lived in the space between heartbeats, as though the entire court held its breath in anticipation of what would follow. Cersei had finally agreed to listen, truly listen, to what he had to say. He remembered all too well her anger and mistrust over the years, the barbed comments and secret plots meant to undermine him, even end him. Yet there had been a moment when Jaime's voice and Tyrion's own pleas, combined with the unstoppable wave of events, shifted her perspective. It might have been the weight of the army of the dead and the prospect of an endless winter. It might have been a fleeting desire for legacy and self-preservation. Or it might have been something as simple as Jaime's tired eyes, his battered sense of honor. Whatever the cause, they were here, and the hush was about to break. The doors opened and the knights of the Kingsguard filed in on either side. Between them walked Cersei Lannister, regal in black velvet embroidered with golden lions. A ring of rubies encircled her throat, reflecting light with each measured step. She did not look at Tyrion immediately, but her gaze swept the hall, a queen's gaze which had once inspired him to shrink in her presence. He took a moment to fortify his resolve. She was still dangerous, her cunning unmatched, but if she was willing to accept peace terms, if she was truly going to uphold her word, then perhaps the world could shift on its axis for the better. She took her seat on the Iron Throne. Tyrion felt a pang, recalling how that seat was forged with the swords of 1,000 conquered foes. It had drawn blood from many who had perched upon it, sometimes as a reminder that no seat of power comes free of pain. But Cersei did not seem afraid of it. She had sat there for years now, confidently. Silence endured a moment longer. At last, she addressed him. "You requested this audience. You have my attention." Tyrion inclined his head, taking care to keep his posture respectful. "I am grateful you agreed. Many lives may be spared if we put aside our enmities, at least for a time. This war between the living and the dead does not discriminate, Cersei. Even you and I must see the sense in uniting." Cersei's lips formed a thin line. The word uniting in her brother's voice might well taste bitter on her tongue. "I have heard your arguments, little brother. Your queen Daenerys Targaryen demands my surrender, or she offers a truce. I want to be sure I understand precisely what is being asked of me." He glanced from her to Jaime, who stood to her right in a plain suit of armor. His expression was set, neither kind nor cruel. The ghost of the man Tyrion once knew lingered behind those keen eyes. In that moment, Tyrion saw how tired Jaime looked, how burdened by the passing of time. He wondered if this was the same man who'd once rescued him from a dungeon so many years ago. Tyrion cleared his throat softly. "Queen Daenerys asks for no kneeling from you, not at this juncture. She respects that in the face of an enemy who threatens all of humanity, crowns and titles become secondary. She only seeks your swords, your men, your alliance. When winter is over and the White Walkers are nothing but ice dust, then we can speak of further negotiations. But if we do not unite, there may be no realm left to rule, no matter whose banner flies over the castle walls." Cersei's left hand gripped the arm of the Iron Throne. Tyrion noted the tension in her knuckles. "I do not forget what Daenerys Targaryen is. A foreign invader with dragons, seeking to usurp the legacy of my house. Yet it seems we have no choice if half the stories are true." Her gaze flicked to Jaime, and the flicker in his eyes was enough to confirm that they had spoken at length about the living dead. "We shall accept these terms. At least for now. I will grant your queen the use of my soldiers in the fight against the White Walkers. And perhaps we shall see who remains standing when the snows melt." A voice in Tyrion's head whispered that this could be a trap. Cersei was capable of anything, and if she had decided this path forward, she might simply be spinning a new web. Yet there was no visible duplicity in her eyes. She was guarded, yes, but not brimming with that particular brand of venom he knew so well. Perhaps she had come to see the sense that Jaime had tried to impress upon her for so long. The threat in the north was real, and even a lion must bow to the might of ice and death. He managed a small nod, not quite able to smile. "Thank you, your grace. Let us pray we have time enough to prepare." He left the throne room with a swirl of thoughts flitting behind his temples. His footsteps echoed through the silent corridors, and with each echo, the significance of the moment deepened. He was walking away from Cersei without the usual feeling of dread in his stomach. Instead, an odd mixture of excitement and wariness. One step forward, he reminded himself, must always be accompanied by caution when dealing with his sister. He found Bronn waiting by a marble pillar, arms crossed. The Sellsword wore a sardonic grin. So, your sister wants to play nice for a change. The world must be ending indeed. Tyrion allowed himself the slightest smirk. Don't forget, she tried to have me killed enough times that I lost track. But if this means thousands fewer innocents die screaming, it's worth a little risk. Bronn snorted. We'll see about that. It's not every day the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms decides to bow her head, even if only a fraction. But if it means we're not all turned to blue-eyed corpses, I won't complain. Tyrion nodded, though he felt a knot tighten in his gut. The war against the White Walkers would require cunning, resources, and, most of all, unwavering cooperation. Now, as the appointed hand of Daenerys Targaryen, he would have to trust that Cersei would not betray them when the tide of battle shifted. Tyrion had done things that weighed on his conscience, but he had never been comfortable with blind trust, least of all when his sister was involved. Still, this was a better outcome than he had dared hope for. They departed King's Landing soon after, a gathering retinue with the Lannister lions in shining golden plate marching in formation behind the Targaryen escort. Civilians poured out onto the streets to watch this strange procession. Some of them jeered, others were merely silent, confusion and intrigue mingling in their eyes. Many remembered when dragons had soared above these walls, burning the Lannister forces outside the city gates. Now, in an abrupt shift of fortunes, the Lannister soldiers were riding under a truce with the Dragon Queen's men. Tyrion rode in a carriage for part of the way, then switched to a sturdy horse. He found the saddle somewhat uncomfortable, a reminder of how seldom he took to a mount these days. The roads leading away from the capital were lined with bent and broken trees from a recent storm. Winter was creeping down from the north, turning the nights chillier, the skies grayer. He kept to himself, consumed in thoughts of the battles to come and the burden he now bore as the intermediary between these uneasy allies. Jaime rode a short distance away, next to Brienne of Tarth. Their murmured conversations were inaudible to Tyrion, but he could see the tension in the line of Brienne's shoulders. She had tried so hard to secure alliances to fight for the living, and now that it was happening, it was as if none of them quite knew how to act. Tyrion supposed that forging peace in the midst of war often left a strange taste on the tongue, relief laced with dread, for if the peace frayed, the ensuing betrayal would be uglier than the original conflict. Cersei, of course, had remained behind in King's Landing, supposedly to manage the capital in their absence. She had assigned a large contingent under the command of one of her trusted generals to march north. Tyrion felt uneasy not having her on the front lines. But perhaps this was all she was willing to give, at least until they had proven the threat truly required every sword. The alternative was that she intended treachery. Yet Tyrion dared to hope. Perhaps she had changed, if only marginally. Maybe motherhood or the promise of being a mother again had altered her perspective enough to see that a realm overrun by undead had no use for proud queens. They pressed northward. The cold deepened. Tyrion found the rations too bland for his liking, but he ate them anyway. There were bigger concerns than culinary delights. Soldiers had to keep their strength. They needed every ounce of warmth and fortitude for the battles that loomed like a grim specter before them. Occasionally, Tyrion allowed himself to walk among the men, offering a word of encouragement here or there. He might be small, but he was the hand of the queen, and in these grim times, a kind word could keep someone's hopes alive when all else seemed bleak. At last, they reached the place designated for their meeting with Daenerys' main force, an old watchtower near the edges of the riverlands, where the flat ground would serve as a decent campsite. Torches illuminated the walls of the ancient structure, their flames dancing with the cold wind. Tyrion dismounted, wincing as his joints protested. He felt older than he once had, as though the trials of the last few years had added decades to his bones. Missandei was the first to greet him, her face lighting up when she saw him. The gentle woman from Noth seemed relieved beyond measure that Tyrion had returned with an actual alliance. Grey Worm stood near her, unsmiling as always, but Tyrion could sense the shift in the man's posture. There was tension, caution, but also something like hope. He found Daenerys inside a large tent where the Targaryen sigil hung from the center pole. She stood over a table strewn with maps, flanked by Ser Jorah Mormont and Varys. The moment she spotted Tyrion, her eyes widened slightly, as though she had braced herself for the worst. He understood. It was not so long ago that he had stood in this very tent, worried that all would be undone by his sister's stubbornness. Daenerys inclined her head. "Tyrion, you have returned more quickly than I expected." He exhaled a breath he realized he'd been holding. My sister has agreed to an armistice and a joint force against the army of the dead. There was a pause as the gravity of his words sank in. Yora's gaze flicked to the map. Varys's expression turned thoughtful. Daenerys breathed in deeply. She accepted? Truly? Tyrion nodded. For her own reasons, I'm sure. But yes, a legion of Lannister men is marching north under the command of one of her generals. Jaime Lannister is here with Brienne, and they have pledged their swords to stand with us. A faint, almost skeptical smile touched Daenerys's lips. Then perhaps the Seven have not forsaken us after all. Or perhaps the threat of the dead is greater than Cersei's pride, which is a staggering notion. Tyrion inclined his head. We have to prepare for every possibility. She could be sincere or she could be planning something. But either way, for now, we have more swords and more resources to stand against the Night King. They spoke deep into the night about strategies, supply lines, the best routes to transport men and provisions to the north. Tyrion's mind buzzed with the complexity of it all. Forging alliances with the northern houses still wary of the Targaryen queen, coordinating with the Vale, ensuring the Ironborn would not raid from the coasts, and now integrating the Lannister Legion into a cohesive strategy. He ended up hunched over a map with Davos Seaworth and Jon Snow's most trusted bannermen, reviewing distances between strongholds, possible choke points to slow the dead. His throat felt raw by the time the candle burned low. A day later, Jon Snow arrived, having scouted the lands around Moat Cailin and beyond. His presence at the War Council brought even more gravity to the proceedings. The king in the north showed a serious, quiet determination that impressed the Lannister soldiers who had never laid eyes on him before. And though the notion of forging a temporary alliance with the queen in the south had once seemed unthinkable to the northerners, the proof of the undead threat had dissolved many old grudges or at least placed them into uneasy dormancy. Amid these discussions, Tyrion made time to speak privately with Jaime. He found his brother near the outskirts of the camp, polishing a new sword. The old Lannister steel had been replaced with something more akin to Valyrian steel, though Jaime had not boasted about it. He merely stood in silence, the sparks from the whetstone glinting in the evening light. Tyrion approached carefully, uncertain of his reception. Jaime raised his head. If you're here to offer me wine, I won't refuse. Tyrion did have a skin of arbor gold slung over his shoulder. He held it out and Jaime took it, swallowing a mouthful before wiping his lip on the back of his hand. Strange times, Jaime said, voice quiet. Strange bedfellows, as they say. Tyrion let out a short laugh. I believe that expression was coined for occasions exactly like this. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Then Tyrion cleared his throat, his voice growing more serious. Why did she do it, Jaime? Why did Cersei finally accept? We brought her a white as proof. I spoke to her reason. But if I know my sister, I fear there is something more. Jaime's jaw tightened. He glanced at the soldiers, his soldiers setting up tents and organizing gear under the watchful eyes of unsullied officers. She is thinking of her child, among other things. She wants to preserve the Lannister name, ensure there is a future in which her child can rule. And believe it or not, she saw what we brought back from beyond the wall. It terrified her. I think she was forced to accept that no matter how cunning, how ruthless she is, she cannot outwit the face of death itself. There was a faint quiver in Tyrion's chest, something akin to hope. Then perhaps she truly will stand with us. If she is pregnant, it changes many calculations. Jaime's gaze dropped to the soil, dusted with a thin layer of frost. I'd like to believe so. But even I can't know for certain, Tyrion. We can only act as though she is sincere and guard our flanks all the same. If I sense betrayal, I will do what I must to protect the realm. Tyrion placed a hand on Jaime's shoulder. The act felt strange, almost foreign, but a ghost of warmth flickered between them. Thank you. That's all I can ask. As the days turned into weeks, the combined force moved ever northward. The biting wind sliced through cloaks and made men's faces red and raw. Supplies became a constant concern. Daenerys's dragon soared overhead on occasion, great-winged silhouettes against a slate-colored sky. For many Lannister soldiers, it was the first time seeing such creatures in living flesh. Some trembled and made the sign of the seven. Others cursed under their breath, but none could deny the power those dragons commanded. Tyrion observed these men, once sworn to the Lannisters, still sworn, in fact, but now allied with the Targaryen queen. He saw the fear in their eyes, the sense of awe. Some quietly questioned whether they had made a pact with devils, but others clung to the hope that the dragons might be their salvation against the undead. The tension did not dissipate overnight, but for now it did not explode into open hostility. When they reached Winterfell at last, snow crunched underfoot and the walls of the ancient castle rose stark against the white sky. Sansa Stark greeted them with as much courtesy as she could muster, though her eyes lingered warily on the Lannister banners. Tyrion sensed her discomfort. He remembered the day he had been forced to marry her, the bitterness in her voice, the sorrow in her eyes. She was changed now, stronger in spirit, a leader in her own right. Yet she offered a polite nod to Tyrion. "Lord Tyrion, I hear you have done much to secure alliances. Winterfell welcomes all who would fight against the Night King, though we have few comforts left to offer." Her gaze drifted beyond him to Jaime, who stood silent, helmet under one arm, golden hand glinting in the weak sunlight. Then to the Lannister contingent behind him. Sansa's posture stiffened. Tyrion knew she carried memories of the War of the Five Kings, of her father's execution, of the horrors inflicted upon her family. Time had not erased those wounds. But the realm was in a state that required new definitions of friend and foe. Tyrion spoke gently. "Thank you for granting us shelter, Lady Sansa. We know it's a burden on your stores and your hospitality. We will do what we can to assist. The enemy draws closer by the day." She pressed her lips together and gave a short nod. "We will need every hand if we're to survive. I will speak with the steward to see how best to incorporate so many new arrivals." Jon Snow and Daenerys arrived soon after, the latter accompanied by her retinue and her dragons who roost beyond the outer walls. The Northmen eyed the dragons with a mixture of wonder and dread. Daenerys did her best to project regality tempered by humility, aware that the Northerners had not fully embraced her. They respected Jon, though, and for a time that was enough to keep the peace. In the Grand Hall of Winterfell, a war council convened. The tables were covered in maps marked with possible lines of defense, from the last Hearthdown to Winterfell itself. The approach of the undead was uncertain, though scouts claimed that the Night King's army was massive and tireless, moving slowly south as the land froze in its wake. The gathering around the table was an unprecedented collection of powerful houses: Stark, Targaryen, Lannister, even a few of the Vale's representatives, and the remaining houses of the North. The plan, as Tyrion understood it, was to mass the bulk of their forces at Winterfell, turning it into a final fortress of humanity. If the undead broke through there, the road lay open to the rest of Westeros. A second line would be stationed near Moat Cailin, but that was a token effort at best. If the living lost Winterfell, everything south would only survive so long as the undead took to reach them. Amid the strategizing, Tyrion's keen mind leapt from one detail to another. He saw to it that the Lannister quartermasters coordinated with the Northern supply masters. He arranged for the Unsullied to train some of the Lannister foot soldiers in certain shield formations that might prove effective against swarming whites. He brokered a conversation between the Targaryen generals and the Knight of the Vale about cavalry maneuvers. Now and again he would catch Sansa's gaze, or Jon's, measuring him as though trying to decipher what brand of loyalty he represented. He answered them with a calm efficiency that masked his own swirling uncertainties. The days passed in a flurry of preparation. The Northmen set about reinforcing Winterfell's walls, building new barricades, stockpiling dragonglass weapons shipped from Dragonstone. The Lannister soldiers joined them, some with genuine willingness, others with reluctant acceptance. Tyrion saw that the friction between these men of different banners still existed. Fights were narrowly averted in the courtyard when old grudges flared. Yet so far, cooler heads prevailed, guided by the knowledge that the real enemy was not each other. Nightfall brought the howling of winter winds, rattling shutters, seeping through the cracks in stone walls. Tyrion sat near one of the fires in the great hall, rolling a cup of warmed wine between his hands. The flames danced, reflecting in the eyes of the men and women huddled around it. He noticed Jaime enter, scanning the hall, then trudging over to sit beside him. Without a word, Jaime accepted a cup of wine. It was peaceful, in a way, to share silence with his brother. The hush of the hall at night, the distant sound of forging in the courtyard, the low murmur of a few soldiers exchanging stories. For a moment, Tyrion allowed himself to imagine a time when they could find a semblance of normalcy, when the threat of the dead was gone, and the realm could rebuild. Before that future arrived, if it ever did, they would have to face the Night King. And face him they did all too soon. Scouts arrived breathless and half-frozen, reporting sightings of the undead columns marching closer than expected. Daenerys called an emergency council. By daybreak, horns sounded across the north. Soldiers scrambled to man the walls. Archers strung their bows. Lines of troops formed outside Winterfell's gates. Jon and Daenerys exchanged a look of grim determination. Tyrion stood by her side, heart hammering in his chest, trying to remain as calm as his mind would allow. And then, on the horizon, came the first sight. A shifting mass of figures, as if the land itself was crawling. The Whites, an unending legion of rotting flesh and icy eyes, marched in lockstep. They covered the fields in front of Winterfell until Tyrion could no longer see the snow. Behind them, specters of white walkers on pale horses. The breath of every living creature turned to frost in the air, the cold intensifying as though the presence of the dead drew all warmth from the world. Tyrion took his place atop the battlements, vantage good for commanding the archers and relaying messages. Down below, the Lannister men formed ranks beside the Unsullied, while the northern lords spread their forces along the flanks. The Vale's cavalry waited on the edges, ready to charge when signaled. Jaime was among them, clad in armor and astride a powerful warhorse. Tyrion tried to spot the golden lion crest in the sea of men, but all he could see was a single knight in battered plate, sword strapped to his waist. Jaime had never looked more resolute. Daenerys took flight on Drogon, flanked by Rhaegal. The thunder of wings overhead was a small comfort in the face of such unimaginable darkness. The dragons roared, releasing jets of fire that lit the dusk sky. When the first wave of Whites hit the trenches the living had dug, torches ignited the carefully placed trap. Flames leapt high, momentarily halting the advance. Arrows rained down from the ramparts, each tipped with dragonglass. Tyrion heard the hiss of the undead as arrow after arrow struck. Some Whites fell, never to rise, but others pushed forward, a relentless tide. Soon, the lines clashed. Metal rang on bone, screams filled the air, and the living fought with a desperation that made them roar defiance at the night. The Lannister soldiers, who had once fought the North in a different war, now found themselves side by side with the very men they had tried to conquer. Dragonglass-tipped spears shattered skeletal rib cages. Northern axes cleaved through the rotted flesh of the dead. Above, Daenerys and Jon swooped down on their dragons, unleashing torrents of dragon fire that lit up the battlefield in bursts of orange. Great swathes of Whites were incinerated, but the legion was enormous. For every one that burned, more stumbled through the flames. The White Walkers spurred their minions onward, looming ominously at the back of the horde. Tyrion relayed orders, trying to keep the lines cohesive. He bellowed down to the archers when to fire, signaled the cavalry when the moment was right. The Vale Knights thundered forward, their horses charging into the flank of the undead, lances leveled. Despite the horror of it, the living found a kind of savage momentum. For a moment, it seemed they might hold the line. Then an unholy shriek tore across the sky. Tyrion's blood ran cold. Out of the darkness soared the Night King upon an undead dragon, Viserion, rotted wings beating the frigid air. Blue flame lanced forth, scorching the ground, incinerating lines of men in a horrifically bright conflagration. Screams filled the night. Winterfell's defenders reeled, forced to scatter. Tyrion's heart hammered in his chest. He saw Daenerys and Drogon wheel about, trying to engage the undead Viserion in the skies. Jon circled with Rhaegal, the dragons snapping at each other as aerial flames lit the clouds. On the ground, chaos reigned. The Whites pressed closer to the walls of Winterfell, their shrieks and moans forming a hideous chorus. Soldiers fell back, many of them wounded or worse. He spotted Brienne rallying a group of knights near a breach in the lines, Jaime at her side. Their swords flashed, cutting down the dead with grim determination. The living formed a makeshift shield wall. Atop the battlements, archers kept firing, though many had exhausted their supply of dragonglass-tipped arrows. Tyrion waved desperately for the reserves to bring more. Suddenly, he felt the stone beneath him tremble. The undead giant that had been rumored to stalk the Night King's army crashed against the outer wall with horrifying force. Men screamed as the creature broke through, seizing defenders in its massive hands and throwing them aside like dolls. The breach widened. Whites poured in. Tyrion's panic spiked. He shouted for the Lannister reserves. A group of them rushed to hold the new break in the defenses. He recognized some of the sigils on their armor, minor houses sworn to the Lannisters. They fought bravely, surging forward with spears and swords, trying to pin down the giant to keep the flow of Whites from overwhelming the courtyard. A roar drew Tyrion's attention skyward again. Drogon and Viserion collided in the air, the undead dragon's skeletal maw snapping at his living counterpart's scales. Daenerys clung to Drogon's saddle as the beasts tumbled through the clouds, swirling in a dance of tooth and claw. Flames roared from Drogon, bathing Viserion in scorching heat. But the undead dragon had no sense of pain. It kept fighting, its blue flame licking across Drogon's flank. Tyrion saw a swirl of movement as Jon and Rhaegal tried to flank the Night King from behind, but a brutal tail swipe from Viserion clipped Rhaegal's wing. The green dragon roared in pain, plummeting toward the ground. Jon held on for dear life. Amid the chaos, an eerie hush rippled through the whites for a split second, as if the Night King willed them to shift their focus. Suddenly, they surged toward Winterfell's main gate in a concentrated wave, climbing over each other to scale the walls. Cries of the living rose in alarm. Tyrion hurried down the steps from the battlements, weaving past men locked in desperate combat. Whites lunged at him, but a pair of northern soldiers intercepted them, hacking them down before the creatures could tear into Tyrion's flesh. He made his way into the courtyard, where the fighting was fierce. The undead giant still rampaged, smashing aside men and hurling them into the air. Siege weapons were in splinters and the ground was slick with blood and gore. "Focus on the giant," Tyrion shouted to a group of soldiers standing in shock. "Dragonglass arrows? Aim for its eyes." Whether they heard him or not, a volley of arrows soon whistled through the air, some piercing the giant's neck and shoulders. It roared in rage. One arrow found its mark in the eye and the towering creature stumbled. Another arrow struck home. The giant crashed down, flattening a dozen whites beneath it. A ragged cheer erupted from the defenders, though it was short-lived as more whites flooded in. In the chaos, Tyrion glimpsed the battered figure of Jaime Lannister, helmet knocked off, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and blood. He fought with his Valyrian steel sword, cutting down white after white, but they kept coming. Brienne was at his back, also fighting relentlessly. Their combined skill held the line for precious moments. A wave of whites rushed them and Jaime stumbled. One creature lunged for him, skeletal hands grasping at his throat. Tyrion's heart leapt in terror. Then a sword flashed, Podrick Payne, wide-eyed and determined, slashed the white away from Jaime. Brienne grabbed Jaime's arm and hoisted him back to his feet. For that instant, the three of them stood together, an unbreakable line of steel in a swirling maelstrom of death. A deafening roar rattled the very stones of Winterfell. Tyrion turned to see Drogon plunging from the sky, trailing smoke from his scorched wings. The beast landed heavily in the courtyard, Daenerys still in the saddle, her face ashen and streaked with soot. The undead dragon was nowhere in sight, but Tyrion could hear it shrieking above, locked in a new aerial assault with Rhaegal. Daenerys slid off Drogon, unsheathing a dragonglass-dipped spear. Tyrion hurried to her side, ignoring the pounding in his chest. "Your Grace, you must find safety," he yelled over the din. She shook her head fiercely. "There's no safety here, Tyrion. Either we stand or we die. I will not hide." A sudden gust of bitter cold wind swept across the courtyard and the fighting lulled. In the midst of the swirling snow and ash, the Night King himself strode forward, pale features etched in an expression of chilling calm. His icy blue eyes fixed on Daenerys. The whites around him parted, forming a circle of death. Daenerys lifted her spear, Drogon growled, and Tyrion felt his insides twist. Jaime and Brienne pressed through the throng, trying to reach Daenerys' side, but the ring of whites held them back. As the Night King raised his hand, the wind seemed to moan in agony. Tyrion watched in horror as some of the fallen soldiers began to stir, jerkily rising from where they lay in the blood-soaked snow. The dead Lannisters, the dead Northerners, all now enthralled by the Night King's power, turning their icy eyes on the living. Daenerys' expression flickered between despair and fury. She shouted a single word, "Dracarys." Drogon unleashed a storm of fire at the Night King. Flames roared, wrapping the White Walker in scorching heat. For a moment, it was as if the entire courtyard was ablaze. Yet when the flames died away, the Night King stood unscathed, ice crystals forming along the ground beneath him. A collective gasp tore through the defenders. He took another step forward. Daenerys braced herself, determined not to back down. Tyrion's mind raced. He knew they needed Valyrian steel or dragonglass to kill a White Walker, but how to get close enough? The ring of whites pressed tighter around them. Suddenly, a shadow streaked through the ring, a small figure, fast and lithe. Arya Stark. She moved like a wraith, leaping over the back of a white and slamming her Valyrian steel dagger into the Night King's back. His reflexes were inhuman, though, and he twisted, catching her wrist before the blade could sink deep. A hiss of ice crackled. Arya struggled, her face contorted with effort. The Night King's grip threatened to snap her bones. Tyrion's heart lurched. He saw an opening if only he could reach it. The Night King's attention was locked on Arya, if only for a second. Jaime, no more than 10 feet away, hurled his sword with desperate strength. The Valyrian steel blade spun end over end. The Night King released Arya to dodge, the blade missing him by a whisper. She used that instant to twist free, dropping to the ground and rolling away. Brienne and Podrick attacked from another angle, trying to keep the Whites at bay, but the ring tightened again. Drogon roared, swiping with his claws, but Whites clung to his sides, stabbing at him. Tyrion, helpless with no Valyrian steel, could only watch from behind Daenerys, brandishing a short blade of dragonglass that felt pitiful in his trembling hand. In the next moment, the Night King advanced again, reaching for Daenerys with an otherworldly grace. She slashed with her spear, but he moved too quickly. He seized the shaft, shattering it with ice-cold force. Daenerys stumbled back, and he loomed over her, jagged spear of crystal forming in his hand. A bellow of rage tore from someone's throat. Jaime. He had retrieved his sword, now coated in ice. He lunged at the Night King, bringing the Valyrian steel down in a desperate overhead strike. The Night King pivoted with unearthly speed, raising his crystalline weapon to parry. Steel and ice clashed with a sound that reverberated through every stone of Winterfell. Sparks of frost and light exploded from the contact. Jaime grunted, forced to one knee by the Night King's superior strength. Tyrion's breath caught. If Jaime fell, Daenerys would be helpless, and the living would lose their best chance at uniting the realm. Then Arya darted in again, impossibly quick, trying to strike at the Night King's flank. He whirled, swatting her aside with a backhand. She crashed against a fallen beam, the breath knocked from her lungs. But the distraction was enough. Jaime shifted his stance, hooking his golden hand under the Night King's elbow, forcing the ice spear wide. Daenerys, scrambling for anything, found the broken half of her spear. The tip was still intact, sharp and shimmering with dragonglass. With a cry, she thrust upward, driving it into the Night King's exposed side, beneath his raised arm. For an instant, Tyrion thought it might fail, that the Night King would turn the blow aside. But the shard of dragonglass sank deep. A flash of eerie blue light shuddered across the courtyard. The Night King's eyes widened with sudden shock. Jaime wrenched away, stumbling backward as the White Walker staggered. There was a heartbeat of stillness. Then cracks of ice began to spread across the Night King's form from the point of impact, spiderwebbing out until his entire body was fractured, ephemeral light seeping through. With a silent burst, the Night King shattered into glimmering shards of ice. A breath later, every White in the courtyard collapsed in a cascade of lifeless bones. A stunned hush fell over the battlefield. Men and women, battered, bloody, barely able to stand, all stared at the spot where the Night King had stood. Daenerys still knelt in the snow, spear tip clutched in her shaking hand. Jaime stood beside her, chest heaving. Arya gasped for air, slowly pulling herself to her feet. Above, Rhaegal and Viserion broke their gruesome dance. The undead dragon disintegrated mid-flight, crashing to the ground in fragments of frozen bone. A distant roar marked Drogon's triumph. The White Walkers at the edge of the battlefield evaporated into shards of ice, and the Whites dropped in place. The living had survived. They had won. What followed was a stunned relief, the survivors taking in the horror of what they had endured. The courtyard was strewn with bodies of both friend and foe, the snow-stained crimson, steam rising into the chill air. But the dead no longer moved. Some men cheered weakly, others sank to their knees in tears. Tyrion stood there, chest tight, barely able to believe what his eyes had shown him. They had done it. All of them, Lannister and Stark, Targaryen and the Vale, side by side. They had ended the long night before it truly destroyed them all. Daenerys turned to Jaime, eyes full of gratitude and surprise. You saved me." He shook his head. "I only delayed him. You struck the killing blow." Their words rang hollow in Tyrion's ears, overshadowed by the magnitude of what had happened. But the three of them, Daenerys, Jaime, and Arya, had come together in that critical moment. A queen, a knight, and a young assassin. Strange allies in a strange war, but that was the truth of it. In the aftermath, the living tended to the wounded. Fires were lit to burn the enemy corpses so they would never rise again. The once proud courtyard of Winterfell became a grim scene, but also a place of renewed hope. As the sky began to lighten, heralding dawn, Tyrion found himself leaning against a cracked wall, too exhausted to stand upright. He watched as medics moved among the injured, heard the quiet sobs of those who had lost friends, and felt the numbness of battle begin to yield to sorrow and relief. Jon Snow approached, his arm in a makeshift sling. He had been thrown from Rhaegal during the fight and had a broken shoulder, but he stood tall despite the pain. "We did it," he said quietly. "Somehow." Tyrion nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sky was brightening from black to a pale, chilly gray. "Yes. But at what cost?" Jon exhaled, scanning the courtyard. "A heavy one. The North, the Lannisters, everyone lost men. But we won. The Night King is gone." It sank in like a cold stone settling in Tyrion's chest. The Night King was gone. The Great War was over. And now came the complexities. The realm was free to descend into its usual squabbles, or maybe something new would take shape. But that was tomorrow's problem. Right now, the living had survived. Word spread quickly of who had struck the final blow and how Jaime Lannister had helped. Tyrion saw the looks passing among the soldiers. Cersei's forces, the Lannisters, had not been traitors to the cause. They had fought and bled just like everyone else. It felt surreal, almost a dream. If his father, Tywin, could have lived to see the day the Lannisters and Starks fought side by side to save the realm, well, Tyrion wondered if the old man would have recognized the world anymore. As the sun rose, Daenerys gathered the survivors in the Great Hall, those able to stand at least. She spoke in a clear voice, though it trembled with emotion. "We have triumphed over the darkness. Men and women of all houses fought together, bled together, and proved that unity can overcome any foe. Let this victory serve as a sign that the Seven Kingdoms need not be torn apart by petty rivalries. We have lost much, but we have gained a future." Thunderous applause broke out, mixed with tears. Tyrion watched Jaime, who stood to one side, his golden hand clutched at his side. The knight's face was pensive, as though he carried the weight of too many memories. Brienne stood near him, battered but unbowed. Arya lingered near the shadows, a faint smile on her lips at Daenerys' words. Jon stood at the queen's side, a quiet pillar of support. In the days that followed, the battered armies remained at Winterfell to recover. The air was still painfully cold and the nights so silent that Tyrion sometimes woke with the memory of the undead horde's screams echoing in his skull. But no more whites walked beyond the walls. Patrols confirmed that they had all collapsed across the north, dissolving into piles of bones. The threat was ended. Sansa Stark presided over quiet funerals. Rows and rows of pyres lined the snow, each bearing the remains of the fallen. Stark, Lannister, Targaryen, Vale, all burned together. Grey Worm recited a prayer for the Unsullied who had perished. Jaime joined a group of Lannister men, heads bowed as their dead comrades were committed to the flames. Tyrion drifted among them, sometimes offering words of solace, sometimes remaining silent. The crackle of burning wood and the faint smell of smoke became a constant presence. Eventually, the time came to decide the future. A council was convened in Winterfell's library, a smaller, more private meeting than the gatherings for war. Daenerys sat at the head of a long table, Jon beside her, Tyrion at her right hand. Opposite them sat Sansa, Arya, Davos, Brienne, and Jaime, representing the North, the Vale, and the Lannisters. The question hung in the air. Now that the dead were vanquished, what next? Daenerys spoke first. "We have triumphed in the Great War. Now we must ensure that the Seven Kingdoms do not descend into chaos. I once sought the Iron Throne as a conqueror, but I have seen the cost of war. I would rather be a unifier." Sansa's eyes flickered with cautious respect. "You know the North has shed much blood, and we still remember what the Lannisters did. But we also remember this victory was only possible because of their help. And if you aim to bring peace, I believe that is something we can negotiate." Her gaze slid to Jaime, who straightened. "The Lannister forces stand ready to acknowledge Daenerys Targaryen as Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, provided that the terms of this peace grant the North its due respect, and that the alliances formed here remain stable." Arya interjected, her voice quiet. "You think Cersei will accept that?" Jaime's expression tightened. "My sister agreed to this truce and gave her men to fight. If we send word of our victory and intentions, she may choose to come north or bid us south to discuss terms. But she's witnessed the cost of betrayal. The realm stands behind Daenerys now, having seen who led them to victory. If Cersei refuses, she will be standing alone." Davos murmured, "A cornered lion can be the most dangerous, But the realm has been saved once by unity. Perhaps that unity will hold. Tyrion listened, mind whirring. He remembered all the cunning moves his sister had made. Yet he also recalled the day she accepted the armistice, the tired look in her eyes. She was pregnant then, or so Jaime believed. Perhaps, with the dead now gone, she would be even more protective of her unborn child's future. Peace might be the only path to ensure that child's survival. Daenerys turned her gaze to Jon. What does the king in the north advise? Jon shifted, meeting her eyes with a fondness that had grown through their trials. I advise that we honor the alliance that saved us all. The north will remember. We have no desire to bow to a foreign queen, but we already have. And we have seen that you fight for the living. I pledged myself to you. That pledge remains. Sansa inclined her head in agreement, albeit with a trace of reluctance. So long as the North retains some measure of autonomy, our ways, our traditions, our rights, I will bow to this arrangement. Better that than more war. A sense of relief swelled in Tyrion's chest. For the first time in a long while, it seemed feasible that the Seven Kingdoms could enter a new era of peace without further bloodshed. There would be negotiations and compromises, of course, but the biggest obstacle, the existential threat of the dead, was gone. Now came the delicate dance of politics. Jaime cleared his throat. I will write to Cersei. I will urge her to come to terms. If she is wise, she will see reason. If not, then we must be prepared. And so messages were sent south, carried by fast riders who braved the cold roads to King's Landing. In the weeks that followed, the battered forces at Winterfell gradually reorganized. Some Lannister soldiers, their loyalties uncertain, decided to leave, returning south on their own. Others stayed, forming friendships with the northern soldiers they had fought beside. Tyrion marveled at the fleeting sense of camaraderie men bound by a shared trauma. Walls once built by centuries of hatred had cracked during a single dreadful night of survival. As winter's grip tightened, they rationed supplies and waited for a response from King's Landing. The letter came at last, sealed with the Lannister sigil. Tyrion read it alongside Jaime, both bracing for the worst. To their shared surprise, Cersei's words were measured, if not warm. She proposed a royal summit in the Riverlands near Harrenhal to negotiate the realm's future. A precarious olive branch, but still an olive branch. Tyrion exhaled in relief. Jaime looked pensive, as though he was trying to interpret hidden meaning. But he read the letter again and found no direct threat. Daenerys agreed to the summit. She and Jon prepared to travel south with a modest retinue, determined not to appear threatening. Tyrion insisted on coming along both as Hand of the Queen and as a Lannister who might mediate. Sansa remained at Winterfell, left to govern the north. Jaime would also travel, uncertain but resolute, hoping to broker a peace that might last. Once more, the roads were lined with snow and ice as they journeyed south. The further they traveled, the less snow lay on the fields until they reached the Riverlands, where winter's bite was gentler. Harrenhal rose on the horizon, its melted towers a grim reminder of what Dragonfire could do. The old fortress, often cursed, would now serve as the meeting point for those who intended to reshape the fate of Westeros. They arrived to find that Cersei had already set up her entourage in the enormous courtyard. A line of Lannister guards stood watch. The looming ruin seemed to swallow all who entered, its blackened stone walls and vast courtyard a testament to the folly of kings. Tyrion felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather as he guided Daenerys toward the center of that space. Cersei awaited them, draped in black and gold. The sunlight caught the crown on her head, her blonde hair pulled back severely. Tyrion tried to read her expression. She looked composed, even somewhat regal, but not overtly hostile. Jaime dismounted, approaching her with measured steps. He bowed, though not deeply. She regarded him with a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Daenerys approached, every inch a queen, with Jon at her side and Tyrion just behind. The hush was absolute. You could almost hear the distant creak of timbers in the ancient ruin. At last, Cersei spoke. It seems we have all survived the longest night. My men report rumors of your victory. Congratulations. Daenerys inclined her head. It was won by all who fought. Your soldiers played their part. Silence stretched again. Cersei's gaze flicked to Tyrion. I see you still stand at the Dragon Queen's side, little brother. Did you imagine this day, when we would meet without war horns blowing? Tyrion swallowed. I imagined many things, Cersei. This was not among them. Yet here we are, to speak of peace. A faint curve touched her lips. Peace. A precious thing easily shattered. We sacrificed much for this truce. Now the question is, what next? Jaime placed a hand on his sword hilt, not in threat but in a gesture of tense habit. We unify, Cersei. We must. The Night King is gone, but the realm is in tatters. She shifted her focus to Daenerys. Am I to bend the knee as you demanded before? Daenerys's tone was calm, measured. I demanded it once, but the circumstances have changed. I do not come here seeking to burn cities. I come as a conqueror turned protector, and I offer you a place in the new order. Together, we can rebuild the realm. I ask for fealty, but I also offer my protection and goodwill. I will not force you to your knees. Cersei's eyes narrowed. She studied Daenerys for a long moment as if searching for cracks in her sincerity. Tyrion felt his pulse quicken. If Cersei refused, if she lashed out. But instead, his sister spoke in a measured tone. Westeros cannot survive another war right now. Kings and queens have risen and fallen these last years. I will not see my child born into a realm of ashes. I accept your terms. A collective breath seemed to be released, as if everyone in that courtyard had been holding it. Cersei extended a hand. Daenerys hesitated, then clasped it. The lion and the dragon forging a bond that might reshape history. Jon stepped forward. We will all have to make sacrifices to ensure this peace is not hollow. The North has bled, and so have the other kingdoms. If we can share resources, open trade routes, help each other rebuild, then perhaps trust can blossom. Cersei's gaze flicked to him, and if there was a flicker of resentment, knowing he was once a rebel, the bastard son of Ned Stark, she buried it beneath practicality. Very well. Let this be the start of a new era. They moved into one of Harrenhal's less ruined halls to continue the talks. The ceiling overhead was blackened but intact enough to keep out the weak sunlight. Guards stood at attention by the door. Tyrion hovered near Daenerys while Jaime stayed beside Cersei. The negotiations were delicate, requiring delicate words. Ultimately, Cersei agreed to acknowledge Daenerys as Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. She would retain governance over the Westerlands, collecting taxes for the crown and offering men when needed, as would all other regions. In return, Daenerys vowed to respect the autonomy of each region's customs. The North's request for greater self-governance was granted, so long as they recognized Daenerys' authority in matters concerning the realm as a whole. It was not an easy discussion, and tempers flared at times. But Tyrion stepped in when needed, defusing tension with wry logic. Jaime spoke quietly to Cersei, reminding her of the devastation they had narrowly averted. Jon and Daenerys stood united, presenting a strong front. In the end, hours later, the negotiations reached a conclusion. A formal proclamation would be drawn up to be announced across Westeros. Queen Daenerys Targaryen sat the Iron Throne with the support of House Lannister and the North. Peace was declared, and the realm would begin the slow work of mending. Once the words were spoken, the scribes began their work, and everyone seemed to sag with exhaustion. Tyrion saw Daenerys meet Jon's gaze, a hint of relief shining there. Jaime stood near Cersei, though not too close, both of them silent. Tyrion wondered what words might pass between them in private. But in public, they presented a unified front. It was done. The living had triumphed, not just in the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. And what of the future? Tyrion felt a stirring of optimism, though tempered by the knowledge that peace in Westeros could be fleeting. The seeds of old grudges might still lie dormant. But if even Cersei Lannister could see reason, perhaps there was hope indeed. On the morning they departed Harrenhal, Tyrion stepped out into the courtyard and felt a cautious smile curve his lips. The air was still cold, but there was a gentleness to it that hinted of spring's eventual approach. Snow melted in patches around the broken stones. Soldiers packed up their tents. He spotted Jaime leading a small contingent of Lannister knights. His brother caught his eye, giving him a faint nod. No words were needed between them in that moment. They had come a long way from the day Tyrion had been on trial for murder and Jaime had helped him escape. Now they served the same cause, a fragile peace in a fractured realm. Not far away, Daenerys and Cersei spoke in low voices, the two queens forging some final detail about trade routes or shipments of grain. Their expressions were serious, yet not hostile. Tyrion marveled at the sight. Who would have believed it possible? The cunning Lannister queen, famed for her ruthlessness, standing in earnest dialogue with the breaker of chains. He turned his gaze to the broader horizon, to the wide fields beyond Harrenhal's walls. The final war was over, at least, the war that threatened to end the world of men. Now, a different kind of battle began, one of rebuilding, of healing. It would not be easy, but this was what Tyrion had always wanted, a realm that did not tear itself apart for sport. A realm led by someone wise enough to break the cycle of bloodshed. If it took the threat of the dead to bring them all to this point, then so be it. That night, they made camp under a sky dusted with stars, the negotiations behind them and a future of cautious hope ahead. Tyrion found himself sitting around a fire with Bronn, who still wore a sardonic grin. The Sellsword had survived the Great War, and if he felt any stirrings of conscience, he hid it well. Nearby, Podrick quietly tuned a lute, strumming a few soft chords that reminded Tyrion of simpler times when a song and a cup of wine could offer a fleeting respite from the world's cruelty. Jaime joined them, sitting down heavily on a log by the fire. He removed his golden hand to flex the remains of his arm, wincing at the soreness. Tyrion offered him a wineskin. Jaime took it, gulped, then handed it back. For a long moment, they simply stared into the flames. At length, Jaime spoke. "We did something good, Tyrion." Tyrion nodded. "We did." Bronn rolled his eyes. "Spare me the sentiment. Could have made a fortune betting on the dead if they'd been good customers. But they weren't exactly chatty, were they? So peace it is then." Tyrion shot Bronn an amused look. "You'll have to find more legitimate ways to line your pockets now." Bronn smirked. "Oh, I'll find a way. Maybe our dear queen will grant me Highgarden after all. A man can dream." They shared a small laugh, letting the tension seep out. Tyrion could almost pretend, for that moment, that they were back in simpler days. Then he remembered everything they had lost. The moment was bittersweet. Still, he allowed himself to feel pride. He had gambled on Cersei's willingness to help, and for once she had not disappointed him in the end. Thousands more lives had been spared. The White Walkers were gone, and Westeros had a chance to start anew. Morning came with a thin mist rolling across the grass. Daenerys' retinue prepared to head for King's Landing, where she would finally seat herself on the Iron Throne in a realm that was not at war. Jon would ride with her, proclaiming the North's loyalty. Sansa would remain in Winterfell, overseeing the region and ensuring its well-being. Jaime would likely return to the Westerlands, bridging the gap between his sister and the crown. And Tyrion, he was the hand of the queen. He would advise her, help her shape policies that might heal rather than harm. So they set off, a smaller caravan than before, for the ravages of war had thinned their numbers. The roads were still hard, but each turn of the wheel brought them closer to the capital. At last, King's Landing rose before them, the city's walls unbroken this time. There were no raging battles, no dragons burning the gates. Instead, they were greeted with curiosity and cautious celebration. Word had spread that the dead were vanquished, that the realm was saved. Citizens lined the streets, watching as Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow led the procession. Tyrion rode behind them, stoic, remembering how different this scene was from when he had arrived in chains so long ago. When they reached the Red Keep, Cersei herself did not appear on the steps. Instead, Qyburn greeted them with some measure of respect, guiding them into the throne room. Tyrion felt a strange pang as he entered that vast chamber again, remembering the day he had faced trial. But this time he was not a prisoner. He was the hand of the queen, and the occupant of the Iron Throne, by all the agreements forged, would be Daenerys Stormborn. In a quiet ceremony witnessed by the gathered lords and ladies, Cersei stepped aside, removing the crown from her head. Jaime stood near her, his face set in calm acceptance. Cersei seemed almost solemn as she turned to Daenerys. "The realm is yours," she said, her voice subdued. "Rule it well." Daenerys nodded, moving forward to take the crown. She did not place it upon her head immediately, instead holding it in her hands as if weighing its significance. Then she spoke, her voice echoing in the throne room. "I swear to uphold justice and peace in the realm, for all who dwell in it. Let us learn from the horrors we have endured, so that we may never repeat them." She passed the crown to Missandei, who held it until Daenerys seated herself upon the Iron Throne. Only then did Missandei place it on her brow. Tyrion felt an unexpected surge of emotion. He had worked so long for this moment, in one fashion or another, and it had arrived not through fire and blood alone, but through the forging of alliances, even with the sister who once wanted him dead. A hush filled the hall. Cersei stood off to one side, her expression unreadable. Jaime took her arm gently. She allowed it, for once not recoiling from her brother's touch. Tyrion wondered if she felt a measure of relief to relinquish the burden of ruling. Then Daenerys rose, addressing the assembled court. "Lords and ladies of Westeros, we stand on the brink of a new age. The darkness has passed, and now we must rebuild what was broken. I call upon each of you to join me in ensuring that no more wars tear our realm asunder. We can, through unity, Make these 7 kingdoms prosper. Let us each uphold our vows, so that our children may inherit a land of peace." Applause resonated through the hall. Some clapped more enthusiastically than others, but all recognized the significance of this moment. The bells of King's Landing began to ring outside, not tolling doom this time, but a cautious, hopeful celebration. Tyrion's gaze swept the crowd, noting the faces of those who had once scorned him, some who had actively tried to kill him. They stood here now in acceptance, or at least compliance. He saw Varys in the background, a faint, approving smile on the spider's lips. Brienne of Tarth stood near Podrick, a sense of duty fulfilled. Grey Worm and the Unsullied maintained their stoic guard, and at the far end, the Lannister sigil still hung alongside the Targaryen dragon. Perhaps that was as it should be, for they were united in a single realm now. Later that evening, after the official ceremonies concluded, Tyrion stood on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The waters were calm, the sky streaked with the last hues of sunset. A faint breeze ruffled his hair. He took a sip of wine from a goblet, savoring its taste. Footsteps approached. He turned to see Jaime. His brother joined him at the rail, looking out at the sea. Below them, the city still hummed with life. The bells had stopped, but a sense of relief and new beginnings lingered in the air. Jaime broke the silence. "Never thought I'd see the day the Iron Throne passed willingly from Cersei's hands." Tyrion nodded. "Nor did I. But perhaps she's tired, Jaime. Tired of all the battles, the losses, the betrayal. The child she carries might have given her hope. Or fear." Jaime's golden hand tapped against the stone railing. "A new world, Tyrion. And you helped bring it about. You always were good at making the best out of impossible situations." A soft laugh escaped Tyrion. "I only tried to keep more people from dying. If that's worth anything, then maybe there's hope for me after all." Jaime's voice grew quieter. "I'm proud of you, little brother." Tyrion froze, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. He had yearned so long for validation from his family, and it had rarely come. Even now, after all they had been through, the words sounded almost unreal. He glanced at Jaime, whose gaze remained steady, sincere. "Thank you," Tyrion managed, voice hushed. "That means more than you know." They stood there, 2 brothers, survivors of a war for the living and a war for the throne. And now, in this new dawn, they were simply men choosing to help forge a better future. Or so Tyrion dared to believe. Below, the city's torches flickered to life, one by one, as King's Landing prepared for nightfall. In the distance, a dragon's silhouette soared briefly across the darkening sky, the last vestiges of daylight catching on its wings. Tyrion watched it with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He remembered every sacrifice, every tear shed, every betrayal suffered, and every risk taken. This moment, precarious though it was, felt like a reward. He raised his goblet to the sky. "To the realm of the living," he murmured, voice carrying softly on the breeze. Jaime raised an imaginary cup, his golden hand reflecting the dusk light. "To the living." And so their story continued, not with the clang of swords or the roar of war horns, but with the quiet promise of peace. The last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, ushering in a night free of the terrors that once haunted their dreams. The road ahead would not be easy. Westeros had its share of grudges, plots, and hungry lords. But for the first time in a very long while, there was a chance to break the cycles of violence and tyranny. What if Cersei Lannister had accepted Tyrion's peace terms? In the hush of that King's Landing night, the answer took shape in the hearts of those who had fought for the realm. Hope blossomed like a fragile flower in the snow, nurtured by unity, compromise, and the shared memory of the horrors they had faced. For in the end, it was that decision, Cersei's decision to accept peace, that turned the tide, preserved countless lives, and forged a lasting bond among the fractured kingdoms. In the quiet moments that followed, Tyrion allowed himself a small, weary smile. He thought of those who had fallen, of the trials that lay behind them. Then he glanced at the flickering torches below and the shining black sea beyond. The future stretched out, vast and uncertain, but filled with possibilities. They had earned this moment by steel and sacrifice, by words and will. And as the new queen sat the throne in peace, Tyrion Lannister knew that the realm had, at long last, a chance to heal and to thrive. Tyrion Lannister remained on the balcony long after Jaime departed, letting the night's quiet envelop him. Below, King's Landing glimmered with torchlight, the city still buzzing after Daenerys Targaryen's elevation to the throne. The bells had rung in celebration rather than catastrophe, an unheard-of notion, given how often in recent memory bells heralded doom. Tyrion's mind drifted to the final council in Harrenhal. Every tense negotiation, every flicker of hostility in Cersei's gaze, every hint of uncertainty in Daenerys's posture had led here. He could hardly believe how tenuous and yet how real this peace felt. So much sacrifice had laid the foundation for this accord, won not just by swords or dragons, but by words and uneasy trust. In a realm as fractured and war-torn as Westeros, it was no small feat, and now the true work had only begun. He finally left the balcony, walking slowly along the corridors of the Red Keep. Moonlight flickered through high windows, throwing pale shapes onto the walls and carpets. Some half-familiar faces passed him in the halls, courtiers who had once belonged to Cersei's inner circle or who had served under the late King Tommen. They bowed or curtsied now, eyes full of questions. He returned brief nods, aware that they must be wondering what this new queen's hand would do to shape the future and how it would affect them all. That was the nature of power. It reformed around new centers, dragging every lesser soul along in its current. When Tyrion reached his own chambers, he found the door partially open. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, illuminating the plain furniture and stacked books. Perched on a chair was Varys, hands folded in his lap, a mild smile curving his lips. "My Lord Hand," the spider greeted softly. "Forgive the intrusion. I took the liberty of warming the room. King's Landing nights can still be cool outside of summer." Tyrion sighed, though not without a small smile. "You've never needed permission to slip into people's chambers, Varys. I'd have been more concerned if you'd knocked." Varys stood, crossing to the hearth with deliberate steps. "A remarkable day, wouldn't you say?" The realm passed from one monarch's hands to another without a single drop of blood spilled, and the Lannisters remained quite central to it all. Tyrion moved to a small table where a jug of wine awaited him. He poured 2 cups and offered one to Varys, who accepted but did not drink immediately. "My sister surprised me," Tyrion admitted. "I wouldn't have believed she'd yield the crown without making someone pay in some horrible fashion. But it seems even she has grown weary of endless war. Or she's cunning enough to realize that the circumstances are no longer in her favor," Varys replied, finally taking a careful sip. "A cornered lion must sometimes pretend to purr, if only for a while." Tyrion allowed himself a deep drink. "Perhaps. But I'll accept that purr if it keeps thousands of commoners alive. And it's not only the people. Cersei carries a child. Maybe that's the reason, or maybe not. Regardless, we've bought peace. And now that the Night King is gone, I pray we can keep the living from tearing each other apart." Varys lowered his gaze to the fire. "Peace in Westeros can be fickle. Yet if anyone can maintain it, it might be a queen who has felt the cost of destruction and an advisor who knows too well how fragile alliances can be." They spoke into the night of lords and ladies, of potential pitfalls in the new arrangement, of the chaos to come when every region tested its boundaries under a new monarch. Tyrion listened carefully as Varys detailed bits of overheard conversation, the Tyrell cousins who still lived and might angle for influence in the Reach. The noble houses of Dorne, mostly decimated by previous wars, who might now seek autonomy. And the Ironborn question, with Yara Greyjoy commanding a fleet but never forgetting the Iron Islands longing for independence. All of these were matters Daenerys would have to address, with Tyrion's counsel guiding her. And though exhaustion pulled at him, he found a stirring of energy in the sheer magnitude of it. Peace was more complicated than war, but it offered more hope. Eventually, he dismissed Varys with a tired smile, promising to speak more in the morning. Alone, Tyrion set aside his wine and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep took him almost immediately, free of the nightmares that had haunted him since the war against the dead. For the first time in weeks, he felt the faint glimmer of a future unshackled from inevitable doom. Morning dawned bright, with pale winter sunlight spilling across the city. Though it was still crisp out, the promise of spring clung to the breeze. Tyrion woke to the sound of commotion in the courtyard below, distant but lively, the routine bustle of King's Landing stirring to life. After years of grief and terror, the city was learning how to greet a new day without dread. He washed quickly, donned attire suited to his station, dark fabrics with subtle gold stitching, and a small silver pin in the shape of a dragon's head that marked him as Hand of the Queen. With a last glance in the mirror, he left to find Daenerys. She awaited him in the council chamber, a tall, airy room in the Red Keep that had once been the exclusive domain of the monarch's most trusted advisors. Sunlight streamed through windows behind Daenerys' seat. She wore a gown of black and red, the Targaryen colors, yet her expression was not the hardened conqueror's scowl. She seemed reflective, perhaps even anxious. On one side stood Grey Worm, silent and rigid with discipline. On the other, Missandei, ready to record decisions and counsel her queen. Nearby, Jon Snow and Ser Davos stood in conversation, though both paused as Tyrion entered. Jon offered him a quick, respectful nod. Daenerys motioned for Tyrion to come closer. "We have much to discuss," she said, voice still warm with the memory of their victory. "Thank you for your presence, Lord Hand." He inclined his head. "Your Grace, as ever, I'm at your service. Where shall we begin?" She took a breath. "We've had ravens all morning from various lords. Some express relief that the realm is finally at peace. Others question my right to rule. They wonder why a Targaryen queen sits on the throne when she's given them no reason beyond war to obey. We must prove that our rule does not mirror Ares or the destruction of war." Jon Snow cleared his throat. "The North, for the most part, trusts me when I speak of you. That's one region at ease, at least somewhat. But elsewhere, it's as you say. The Lords of the Reach, the few who remain, question who will oversee their lands now that the Tyrell name is nearly gone." Ser Davos nodded. "They'll want to know what you plan for their future. If we don't fill the power vacuum, someone else might, and not necessarily someone loyal to you." Daenerys looked to Tyrion. "Suggestions?" He paused to gather his thoughts. "We must show that our intention is to rebuild rather than plunder. The fields of the Reach once fed half the realm, but the war with the Lannisters left them scorched. I propose sending envoys there, loyal, well-spoken officials who can start distributing resources for reconstruction. We'll need every bushel of grain we can muster if winter lingers. By helping them recover, we prove we're not here to strip them of what remains." She tapped her fingers on the arm of her chair. "Agreed. You can organize this mission, Tyrion. Send men you trust. We'll also need to address the Westerlands. With Cersei relinquishing the crown, the region still belongs to House Lannister, but the lines of succession have grown complicated. Jaime left with her, but we haven't heard if she intends to keep Casterly Rock for herself or if she'll pass it on. We need clarity to prevent confusion among the lesser bannermen." The mention of his family seat sent a faint ripple through Tyrion's chest. "I'll speak to Jaime. He understands the value of stability. He might persuade Cersei to make a formal statement about the Westerlands' loyalty and leadership." Daenerys rose from her chair, motioning for the group to accompany her. "We walk as we talk. We must see the city. The small folk should know their queen stands with them, not above them." Tyrion fell in beside her as they left the chamber. Jon, Davos, and the others trailed behind. The corridors felt oddly bright, as if the Red Keep had exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. Guards posted along the way bowed, and Tyrion recognized many from the original retinue who had once served under the Lannisters. Now they wore the Targaryen sigil on their tabards, a testament to the shifting allegiances of the realm. Outside, the city's streets were still crowded, but not with the frantic, fearful huddles he remembered from the days of Cersei's vicious rule. People parted to let the queen pass. Some averted their eyes in wariness or doubt, but others offered cautious bows. Children peered wide-eyed at the silver-haired monarch. Daenerys acknowledged them with nods and the occasional soft smile. "You can see it in their faces," Missandei observed quietly to Tyrion. "They're uncertain if this queen is their savior or just another tyrant. Many of them lost everything during the sack by the Lannisters and the battle with your brother's forces outside the city walls. They saw dragons burn men alive. They can't forget that easily." Tyrion sighed. "I wouldn't expect them to. But if Daenerys continues to rule with mercy and fairness, the small folk might find their burdens lessened." They reached a line of stalls near Flea Bottom where goods of all sorts were sold, baskets of fruit, dried fish, threadbare blankets. The smell of cooking onions and cheap ale clung to the air. Jon observed the variety of goods with a keen eye, likely comparing them to the stark conditions in Winterfell. People stopped what they were doing to watch the queen. A hush followed them, broken only when Daenerys paused at a fruit stall and spoke to the vendor, paying him a few coppers for an apple. She took a bite, then handed the remainder to a child who stood nearby, wide-eyed with confusion and awe. It was a small gesture, but it made the crowd shift with whispers of approval. Tyrion saw how Daenerys' gentle approach softened the tension. They moved on, eventually coming to a half-ruined building, once a stable, now used as temporary housing for refugees from the war-torn countryside. Men and women peered from makeshift partitions, some missing limbs, some with haunted eyes. A handful of local septas offered care and prayer. Daenerys paused, sadness clouding her features. "We have to do better for them," she said softly to Tyrion. "If I am queen, if we truly are forging a new era, we can't abandon the wounded and the homeless." Tyrion nodded. We can reallocate some of the crown's funds, what's left of them, and instruct the masters of coin in each region to help create relief programs. It won't be easy. The war left us nearly bankrupt. Davos piped up, scratching his beard. We'll need ships too for trading. If you can restore commerce along the coasts, you'll bring in revenues faster than just taxing the poor devils. Perhaps the Ironborn under Yara could assist if they see it as beneficial. Daenerys gave a short nod, her expression resolute. Let's make it so. Tyrion, prepare letters to Yara Greyjoy and the Prince of Dorne, whoever stands in that position now. Request their cooperation in restoring trade routes. Promise fair treatment and a share of the profits. Thus they set the wheels turning, forging a new sense of governance. It was an exhausting day. By the time they returned to the Red Keep, the sun was slipping behind the city's walls. Tyrion found himself again in the Hand's chambers, struggling to keep track of every item that needed attention. Missandei worked diligently beside him, transcribing letters, shaping official proclamations, and double-checking with Tyrion on the correct wording. Every parchment carried the weight of new authority. One misstep could alienate a region or spark a fresh conflict. Partway through drafting a proposal for distributing stored grain in the Crownlands, Tyrion heard a polite knock on his open door. He glanced up and saw Jaime. His brother stood there, framed by torchlight in the hall, wearing simpler garb than his old regal armor. The golden hand at his side glinted softly. "May I come in?" Jaime asked, voice quiet. Tyrion gestured for him to enter. Missandei took the stack of finished letters and offered a respectful bow before leaving them to speak in private. The door closed and Jaime paced forward, eyes scanning the cramped desk, the half-drunk cup of wine, the flickering candles. "You're working late," Jaime said. Tyrion set down his quill. "If we're to hold this realm together, I'll be working late most nights. Please sit." Jaime settled into a chair, gaze introspective. Cersei's quartered in the rooms once occupied by Myrcella. Less grand than the royal apartments, but she's not complaining. I think she's relieved not to have the Iron Throne at her back. She's kept to herself since we arrived, though. Hardly speaks except to me or Qyburn. Tyrion watched his brother carefully. Does she resent giving up the crown? A flash of conflicting emotion crossed Jaime's face. She says she doesn't. That she's too tired of war to want the throne anymore. But it's Cersei. You know her. She's always thinking, always planning. Still, she's different. Quieter. I believe the child is weighing on her mind. Tyrion considered his own memories of Cersei, the scathing remarks, the lethal ambition. Could motherhood truly soften her? Perhaps. We need clarity about the Westerlands. Daenerys wants to ensure that House Lannister remains stable and loyal under her reign. She's prepared to grant Casterly Rock to whoever will hold it responsibly. Naturally, she assumes that would be Cersei or you. Jaime's jaw tightened. In truth, I have no wish to be Lord of Casterly Rock. Father always intended it for me, but my path has led me elsewhere. And Cersei, the idea of returning there might feel like a backward step. I'm not sure she wants it either, though duty may override her personal feelings. I could speak with her tonight if you like. We can present a united front if the Queen requires a formal declaration. Tyrion nodded, though a pang of old wounds lingered in his chest. Their father had disowned Tyrion from the possibility of inheriting the rock. Times had changed, but some scars were slow to fade. Yes, speak to her. Remind her that if she refuses to claim the seat, Daenerys may appoint another Lannister or a different loyalist to manage the Westerlands. That would be an insult to our family's legacy, though I suspect Daenerys would prefer a Lannister keep it, provided loyalty is assured. Better for everyone that way. Jaime rubbed his temple, exhaustion carving lines into his face. I sometimes wonder how we came to this, kneeling to a Targaryen and forging alliances with the Starks. If I told my younger self this would happen, I'd have called him mad. Tyrion allowed a grim chuckle. Life changes in ways we can never predict. If it means fewer corpses lining the roads, I'll take it. They spoke a while longer, drafting a tentative letter to be signed by Cersei, confirming the Lannisters' pledge of loyalty to Daenerys and clarifying the path forward for the Westerlands. Jaime promised to present it to her. Eventually, he left, leaving Tyrion alone with the soft glow of candles and the daunting stack of tasks he still had to address. The next day came with fresh challenges. A raven arrived at dawn bearing news from the Reach. A minor house once sworn to the Tyrells had seized several undefended villages, installing themselves as local rulers. They refused to recognize Daenerys' claim, claiming a return to proper Undul bloodlines or some such nonsense. Tyrion suspected opportunism more than any real principle. The realm was still in flux. there were always those who took advantage of chaos to carve out a fiefdom. Daenerys met with her advisors in the throne room to debate the proper response. Some among her guard advocated immediate military action. Fly the dragons overhead, reduce the rebels to ash. But Daenerys's expression hardened as she listened. She turned to Tyrion for advice. "Is it wise to burn them out so soon?" she asked. "Or do we risk looking weak if we do nothing?" Tyrion chose his words carefully. A direct show of force might only confirm their worst fears, that you're a tyrant with dragons. But ignoring them entirely sets a precedent that rebellion is tolerated. We need a balanced approach. Send a royal envoy with a modest escort, offer them a chance to bend the knee formally. If they refuse and resort to violence, we respond in kind. We must show we prefer diplomacy but won't shy from force if pushed. Jon spoke up. "I'll go. The North respects me enough. Maybe that carries weight. Ser Davos will come with me, along with a few loyal knights. We'll talk first. If it fails, we'll handle the situation swiftly." Daenerys agreed, trusting Jon's sense of honor might cool hot tempers. She gave him sealed letters of authority to present. Before he departed, they shared a brief, private moment at the base of the throne steps. Tyrion observed from a distance. Despite the swirl of politics around them, the bond between Daenerys and Jon had grown deeper since the Great War. They had fought side by side against the dead, and, though they carried secrets, chief among them Jon's true parentage, which remained known only to a small circle, Tyrion saw genuine respect and admiration in their eyes. Once Jon and Davos set out, Tyrion returned to the day's mountain of tasks. The city guard needed restructuring. The old gold cloaks were riddled with men who'd thrived under Cersei's more brutal directives. Now, some of them were adjusting, while others tried to bribe their way into new ranks. Grey Worm had instituted strict discipline, though his severity sometimes clashed with the local sense of law enforcement. Tyrion spent half the morning mediating. He found help in Brienne of Tarth, who had remained in King's Landing temporarily at Sansa's request to ensure that no further hostilities threatened them. With Brienne's unwavering sense of fairness and Grey Worm's discipline, the city guard began to resemble a more honorable force. By midday, Cersei herself appeared in the throne room. Word spread quickly, and Tyrion left his own meeting to join Daenerys before the dais. The hall was not packed with courtiers. Daenerys had not fully resumed the old Targaryen or Baratheon traditions of holding daily open court, but a scattering of officials and knights were present. Jaime accompanied Cersei, his face unreadable. Cersei approached the steps of the Iron Throne and inclined her head, a show of respect that must have cost her pride. She wore a somber gown of deep burgundy, her hair shorter than it once was. Tyrion stood off to one side, aware that every breath in the hall was held. "Your Grace," Cersei said, voice carefully even, "I come to offer my formal statement on the Westerlands. House Lannister acknowledges Daenerys Targaryen as the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. We pledge fealty, and I, Cersei Lannister, lay aside any personal claim to the Iron Throne, recognizing the new order." A subtle murmur swept through the hall. Though it had been agreed upon at Harrenhal, hearing Cersei speak the words aloud in the throne room felt historic. Daenerys inclined her head in return. "We accept your pledge, and we confirm House Lannister's governance of the Westerlands. Should you wish to reside at Casterly Rock, that seat is yours by ancestral right, on the condition of loyalty." Cersei glanced at Jaime, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She then faced Daenerys once more. "I will accept the seat of Casterly Rock, to ensure the Westerlands remain stable. Jaime will likely remain here to advise the crown, if permitted." Daenerys did not hesitate. "Ser Jaime may remain as liaison between the crown and House Lannister if that is his wish. We welcome his counsel." A hush followed, broken only by the quiet shuffle of feet. Tyrion felt something lift from his chest. The realm had turned yet another corner. Cersei had all but announced her retirement from central power. He stole a glance at her, wondering what thoughts churned behind those unreadable eyes. She appeared composed, but he caught a flicker of weariness or perhaps resignation. Daenerys asked if she wished to speak more, but Cersei simply shook her head. She offered a small curtsy and turned to leave, Jaime at her side. Tyrion stood watching until the throne room doors closed behind them. This was the moment so many had once believed impossible, Cersei ceding real authority without bloodshed. That evening, Tyrion joined Daenerys and a handful of close advisors in the solar, a more comfortable setting than the official council chamber. A fire crackled in the hearth. The queen sipped mulled wine while Missandei and Varys discussed the next steps in forging alliances with Dorne and the Iron Islands. Jorah Mormont, quietly returned to the city weeks before, stood nearby, his face lined by the memories of countless trials. Grey Worm remained on guard, though he occasionally contributed a brief opinion about martial matters. They addressed each concern in turn, allocating ships to bring grain from the Reach once Jon resolved the rebellious Minor House, managing the city watch, keeping the roads safe for merchants, and sending out official word that the war for the throne was truly over. The last item was especially important. Lords and small folk across Westeros still lived in fear, unsure whether a new conflict might erupt at any moment. A calm realm would help them heal. What of the north? Daenerys asked, glancing at Tyrion. Sansa remains there. She rules effectively, but there's always the question, will the north want complete independence now that the war with the dead is done? Tyrion leaned against the table, recalling the dynamic, complex woman Sansa Stark had become. She was willing to accept your overlordship provided the North was respected. I suspect she stands by that, but she'll hold you to your promises. If we treat the North fairly, giving them a measure of self-governance in local affairs, then Sansa will remain loyal. But we must be consistent. Any sign of betrayal or high-handed rule and she'll push back. Daenerys nodded thoughtfully. I have no desire to rule the North with an iron fist. I've witnessed what destruction can come from heavy-handed tactics. Let them keep their ways, so long as they acknowledge the realm's unity. That is enough. They concluded the meeting on a note of cautious optimism. As Tyrion made to leave, Daenerys caught his eye. Stay a moment, Lord Tyrion, she said. Once the others had filed out, she set her cup aside and studied him carefully. How do you think the small folk truly view me? She asked, something vulnerable in her tone. Am I their queen? Or just another conqueror with a crown? He considered carefully. Many are tired of war, of seeing their city battered and their loved ones lost. They want peace and stability. If you can provide those things, if you show you aren't the second coming of the Mad King, in time they'll accept you, even love you. But love isn't earned overnight. A flicker of relief crossed her features. I know. Sometimes I wish my dragons and I had arrived in Westeros in a time of peace so I could show them mercy before they saw me wield fire. Tyrion smiled wryly. We rarely get to choose our timing, Your Grace. She nodded, then leaned back. Still, I will do what I can. Thank you, Tyrion. For everything. He bowed slightly. You honor me. I'll do my best to serve you and the realm. By the week's end, Jaime had arranged for Cersei's departure to Casterly Rock, escorted by a modest retinue of Lannister guards. The day they left, Tyrion watched from a parapet as their small train wound its way through the city gates. Cersei rode in a carriage, no fanfare, no pomp. Jaime remained behind, standing with Brienne and a handful of knights. Tyrion could not help but remember the long and bitter history he had shared with his sister. Part of him felt relief that she was no longer in a position to challenge Daenerys. Another part recognized a subtle sadness. The Lannisters were once an unbreakable family fortress, and now each was scattered. Still, perhaps this was the kinder ending for them all. He joined Jaime in the courtyard afterward. His brother stared at the now empty road. She wanted me to come with her, Jaime said quietly, not looking at Tyrion. But I told her I needed to remain here to ensure the realm has peace. Cersei said she understood, yet she looked hurt. Tyrion rested a hand on Jaime's shoulder. You can't be everywhere at once. You've done what you must to prevent further conflict. If that hurts her feelings. I suspect she'll recover. She's strong enough. Jaime managed a half-smile. Strength has never been her weakness. Word came a day later that Jon's mission in the Reach had gone well. The rebellious Lesser House bent the knee after a tense but bloodless negotiation, swayed by the presence of the king in the north and the promise of fair treatment. They would send hostages to King's Landing as a sign of good faith. Daenerys welcomed the news with obvious relief, praising Jon for his efforts. She asked Tyrion to draft a royal edict thanking the lord in question and granting him certain privileges, ensuring no further unrest. One bright morning, Tyrion was settling down to break his fast in the Red Keep's dining hall, already buried in a fresh stack of missives, when Bronn appeared. The Sellsword carried a mocking grin as always. He sank into a seat opposite Tyrion, ignoring the disapproving glances from the servants. Working already? Bronn asked with a gesture at the papers. I'd have thought you'd at least finish your eggs before starting on the realm's business. Tyrion rolled his eyes. The realm doesn't wait for me to finish my eggs, sadly. What do you want, Bronn? Bronn shrugged with theatrical innocence. Just paying a visit to my favorite Lannister. Heard some rumor that the Queen is handing out titles and lands to those who've served well. Seeing as I helped you survive more times than I can count, I was wondering if there was any such boon in store for me. Tyrion gave him a thin smile. You never miss an opportunity. I can put in a good word with the Queen, yes. But you understand we can't simply gift you Highgarden, especially now that the Reach is rebuilding. Bronn smirked. I heard that excuse before. Fine, perhaps I'll settle for a decent keep somewhere, with fertile lands and a few peasants to boss around. I'm not picky. Tyrion's expression softened a fraction. He did Oberyn a great deal. I'll speak to Daenerys. We'll see if there's a vacant castle in the Crownlands or beyond that meets your demanding standards. In return, you might be called upon to maintain order in the region. That means less gallivanting and more responsibility. Bronn snorted. Responsibility and I never did get along, but if that's the price of a castle, I'll manage. Tyrion assured him he'd do what he could. The Cell's words seemed satisfied for the moment. Once he left, Tyrion turned his attention back to the urgent letters. Among them was one from Dorne, a response from the young noble who had taken a leadership role after Ilaria Sand's downfall. The letter expressed cautious willingness to discuss an alliance with the new queen, but insisted upon certain rights and privileges for Dorne's governance. Tyrion read it twice, then brought it to Daenerys. Dorne, he explained, has often chafed under centralized rule. They retained princely status even after Aegon's conquest. We can grant them some autonomy without weakening the crown, provided we phrase it properly. Daenerys nodded, scanning the letter. Let them style themselves Prince or Princess of Dorne if that pleases them, so long as they recognize my ultimate authority. We need Dorne's resources and they need protection if any of the other powers get greedy. Tyrion drafted a carefully worded reply offering recognition of the Dornish title alongside a guarantee of fair trade and representation at court. It was the kind of delicate compromise that might prevent future rebellions. Every time he sealed another wax crest, he marveled at how the realm's fate now depended on measured words more than brute force. They had found themselves in a world where conversation and mutual fear of more war kept the kingdoms united. Time slipped by in a rhythm of letters, audiences, and small victories. The weather remained cold, but slowly the days grew longer. From the battered fields around King's Landing, laborers began to plow and sow, hopeful that the harvest might not be too lean. Daenerys' supporters distributed some of the stored grain to the hardest-hit areas, endearing her further to the small folk who otherwise might have starved. The city itself, while scarred, showed signs of cautious renewal. Craftsmen repaired collapsed houses, tanners and merchants reopened shops, and the markets regained some measure of bustle. Jon returned from the Reach, staying briefly in King's Landing to deliver his report in person. He mentioned encountering men who had once followed Randyll Tarly, many of whom were skeptical about a Targaryen queen after Daenerys burned Randyll and Dickon Tarly. They still fear you, your grace, Jon said. But they also see you bring order. Fear and hope both move them now. Daenerys' face fell at the memory of that fateful day when she chose to burn the Tarlys for refusing to bend the knee. Tyrion sensed her discomfort, so he gently guided the conversation. Perhaps we can bring those soldiers into the fold more officially. Show them we're not here to punish them further. They might accept that, Jon agreed. But some grudges run deep. Keep an eye on them. And so they did. More correspondences, more gentle approaches, more calculated leniency. Tyrion found himself marveling at how thoroughly the realm could be stitched back together if each party was offered a chance to save face and gain something in return for loyalty. Now and again, Tyrion found moments of quiet to reflect. Sometimes, late at night, he'd climb the ramparts and gaze upon the city's rooftops, thinking of the people who slept under them. Had his sister's acceptance of peace truly changed the course of history, sparing thousands of lives? He believed so. He thought of the Great War, the terror of the Night King's invasion, and the unlikelihood of Cersei sending any troops at all if she had insisted on her old grudges. If they had faced the undead alone, they might have lost. Perhaps all of this, the city, the realm, everything, would be an endless winter wasteland by now. Yet here it stood, battered but alive, forging a new chapter. Some nights, Jaime joined him on those ramparts, The two brothers would share a flask of wine, speaking of the old days in hushed tones, or sometimes not speaking at all. There were still shadows between them, hurts and memories of Tywin's disapproval, of the trial that forced Tyrion to flee, of the father Jaime had once idolized. But in these quiet moments, they found a degree of mutual respect. They had seen the horrors of war and the triumph of near-impossible unity. Perhaps that was enough. Months passed, and a new season began to beckon. The northern snows started to recede, albeit slowly. Reports from Winterfell suggested that roads to the south were opening up again. Sansa Stark wrote often, updating the crown on the North's recovery, the distribution of food, the new alliances among northern houses still reeling from the battles against the undead. Her letters were polite, professional, and occasionally laced with subtle hints that she did not trust Cersei, no matter the peace. Tyrion would carefully reply with reassurances and also probe for Sansa's thoughts on the realm's future. He found her insights sharper than ever. She recognized that old grudges might flare up, but as long as the Crown and the North treated each other with dignity, there was hope. In King's Landing, Daenerys developed new customs that signaled a departure from the savage rule of the past. She held open audiences weekly, allowing commoners to petition the throne for grievances, while Tyrion and other council members stood by to advise. She forbade the tortures that had once occurred in the Red Keep's dungeons, insisting on more humane methods of questioning and sentencing. And though the dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal, remained symbols of her power, she used them sparingly, mostly to patrol the skies or to make the occasional show of force when rumor of banditry arose. The memory of Dracarys had not faded, but at least now the realm saw that she did not burn men for sport or whim. Tyrion took it upon himself to foster a sense of stability in the city. Under Daenerys' permission, he raised a small philanthropic council of sorts, men and women tasked with rebuilding areas destroyed during past sieges, setting up rudimentary schools for children orphaned by the wars, and organizing relief for the many refugees who still poured in. This garnered him not just local gratitude but also some suspicion. Those who disliked the imp wondered if he was trying to buy love. Tyrion paid them no mind. He knew that every library repaired, every child taught to read, would bolster the realm's strength in the long run. One day, while overseeing a new water conduit project near the Dragon Pit, Tyrion received an unexpected visitor, Brienne of Tarth, looking travel-worn and dust-covered. She dismounted a horse, then approached him with her usual stern courtesy. "Lord Tyrion, I've come from Riverrun. There is something you should know." He wiped sweat from his brow, stepping away from the crew hauling stone blocks. "Riverrun? That was once held by the Tullys. Any trouble?" "Not trouble, precisely. Edmure Tully has reclaimed the castle with the help of some loyal men. He acknowledges Queen Daenerys' rule, but he's uneasy. He's heard rumors that the Freys who survived Walder Frey's demise might try to seize the castle again. He asked me to deliver a message to the Queen, requesting a royal decree affirming his right to Riverrun." Tyrion nodded thoughtfully. Edmure Tully was always a mild sort, but he's had a difficult life. With the Freys mostly destroyed, thanks in large part to Arya Stark, there are scattered remnants who might indeed cause him trouble. We can draft a royal decree to secure Riverrun under Tully authority. That's hardly controversial. Brienne hesitated as if something more weighed on her mind. Also, Sansa Stark wondered when we might expect the Queen to visit the North again. She thinks it would do much to cement trust if Daenerys showed herself in Winterfell, perhaps for a tour of the region. Tyrion paused. A royal progress, so to speak. That could be beneficial. Daenerys' presence might remind the Northerners she's not some distant threat. But it's a long journey and the Queen's duties here are heavy. True, Brienne allowed, but I promised Lady Sansa I'd at least bring word. Jon's visits have helped, but some of the lords grumble. The farther they are from the seat of power, the more they imagine old grudges. I'll speak to Daenerys, Tyrion promised. We'll see if we can arrange a trip north before the next winter sets in fully. He organized Brienne's lodging and made certain she had a place on the small council meeting that evening where she shared Sansa's proposal. Daenerys considered, glancing at Tyrion. Is it wise to leave King's Landing so soon? We're in the midst of reconstruction. Tyrion tapped his fingers on the table. A brief progress, perhaps. It would show the realm we care about every corner. The people need to see their queen, not just hear of her. Varys added his own support. Symbolism can be as crucial as swords in these times. A queen who visits her subjects fosters loyalty. Daenerys mulled it over, then nodded. Very well. We'll plan a journey. Jon can accompany me. We'll visit Winterfell, perhaps even the Vale if time allows. Lady Sansa may join us for part of the journey, demonstrating unity. Brienne dipped her head in thanks. The matter was settled. Over the next weeks, Tyrion and Missandei painstakingly mapped out the route, ensuring safe passage and accommodations. They would not travel with a vast army, for that would appear threatening, but neither would they go unprotected. Grey Worm would command a modest guard, and the loyal knights of House Stark would likely join them once they reached the north. Jaime would remain in King's Landing, acting as the crown's overseer alongside a council of trusted advisors. That arrangement caused a flicker of hesitation in Tyrion. Could Jaime hold things together if trouble arose? But Daenerys seemed confident in his ability, and Tyrion couldn't deny the symbolic power of a Lannister helping a Targaryen. And maintain order. On a crisp morning, Daenerys, Tyrion, and their entourage left King's Landing through the towering gates. The city had gathered to watch them go, a mix of curiosity and goodwill in the crowd. Some even cheered. Tyrion rode a sturdy horse beside Daenerys's pale mare, the queen wearing practical traveling attire rather than her formal gowns. Drogon and Regal soared overhead briefly, then flew off as the dragons disliked cramped roads. Likely, they would shadow the caravan from a distance, a living reminder of Daenerys's power. As they traveled north, Tyrion noted the slow recovery of the Crownlands. Villages that had once been ravaged now displayed new thatch roofs, sprouting fields, and a semblance of normal life. The presence of the queen's retinue drew the locals out with curiosity, though some hesitated, remembering the Targaryen banners that once symbolized dragons and conquest. Daenerys dismounted often to speak with farmers or blacksmiths, asking about their lives, the hardships they faced. Tyrion admired how she listened intently, offering small gestures of support, coins from her own purse to repair a well, or instructions for the local bailiff to ensure peasants were not overtaxed. At night, they camped under starry skies or accepted hospitality from minor lords who had never dreamed they would host a queen. Tyrion coordinated the logistics, where the supply wagons would rest, how many men would guard the perimeter, and in each place they stopped, he spent time talking to the local stewards, gleaning information about harvests, trade routes, and any underlying grievances. If a complaint arose about bandits on the roads, Daenerys immediately commanded a small force to deter them, demonstrating her willingness to protect her subjects. Eventually, they left the Crownlands behind, venturing into the Riverlands. The air cooled further, and a gentle rain turned roads to mud. News of their approach spread, so that when they neared Riverrun, Lord Edmure Tully emerged to greet them with a short line of horsemen. Tyrion observed how Edmure looked older than he remembered, darker hair streaked with gray, eyes lined by the stress of captivity and war. Yet he seemed determined to restore his family's dignity. He knelt before Daenerys, albeit a bit awkwardly in the mud. "My queen, it is an honor to welcome you to the Riverlands," he said. "We have prepared lodging for you and your court within the castle." Daenerys guided him to his feet. "Lord Tully, you honor us with your hospitality. I hope to learn more of your efforts to rebuild these lands." Inside Riverrun's walls, they found modest comforts. Edmure had done what he could to restore the keep after years of sieges and occupations. Fires crackled in the great hall, tapestries were being mended, and the staff bustled about eagerly to serve the royal entourage. That evening, over a small feast, Edmure recounted the region's struggles with marauders and the efforts to reclaim farmland from years of neglect. Daenerys listened with care, offering to send stonemasons and carpenters if needed, though she explained that King's Landing also had demands on such resources. Tyrion took note of every request. In return, Edmure reaffirmed his loyalty, praising Daenerys' wisdom in forging peace instead of bringing fire and blood. Tyrion watched it all unfold, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. This, he thought, was what a stable realm could look like, local lords focusing on rebuilding rather than mustering armies. A few nights later, they pressed on, crossing deeper into the Riverlands. The roads turned rougher, dotted with small hamlets. Tyrion occasionally heard talk of a mysterious band of outlaws, but apparently these men targeted only wealthy travelers, rarely harming peasants. Daenerys ordered Grey Worm to post scouts on the approach to each village, ensuring the safety of the caravan. When they finally reached the neck, the weather shifted to a cold drizzle, the terrain growing swampy. Northern men, clad in furs, greeted them with stony faces but made no attempt at hostility. Tyrion recognized a few banners of smaller northern houses. Their leaders offered bows and muttered welcomes, still uneasy about the Southern Queen and her dragons, but mindful of Jon Snow's alliance. News traveled ahead, the Queen was coming to Winterfell. Some Northerners watched them pass with curiosity or suspicion, but no one raised arms. Eventually, the gray silhouette of Winterfell's walls emerged through a rolling mist. Despite the wet chill in the air, Daenerys lifted her head as if taking in the solemn grandeur of the castle. Her breath plumed in the cold. Beside her, Tyrion tugged his cloak closer, memories of their last stand against the undead flooding back. It felt like a lifetime ago. He recalled the frantic battle cries, the frost that crept into every crack of the walls. Now, Winterfell stood intact thanks to the combined forces of men who had once been bitter enemies. The gates opened and they rode into the courtyard. The cold bit Tyrion's face, but he wore a small smile. Jon Snow and Sansa Stark awaited them at the steps leading into the keep, flanked by Arya and Brienne. The northern guards stood in orderly ranks, each wrapped in thick fur cloaks. The wind tugged at their banners, the direwolf of Stark and the three-headed dragon of Targaryen side by side, a sight that still seemed incredible. Daenerys dismounted and Sansa stepped forward. There was a flicker of tension, two powerful women confronting the memory of old grudges, but then Sansa inclined her head. "Your Grace, welcome to Winterfell," Daenerys answered with a polite smile. "Lady Sansa, I appreciate your hospitality." Jon clasped Daenerys' hand in greeting and ushered her up the steps, while Tyrion followed. He paused momentarily to exchange a brief look with Sansa, who gave him a measured nod. Despite their past, a forced marriage, the horrors both endured, there was a shared respect, forged in the crucible of war and a world turned upside down. He returned her nod, grateful for her acceptance, however cautious. Inside, the warmth of Winterfell's great hall embraced them. Servants brought hot mulled wine and hearty northern fare, stewed meats, black bread, roasted root vegetables. Sansa guided Daenerys and Tyrion to a long table near the hearth, while Arya and Jon joined them. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, prowled in the background, red eyes gleaming watchfully. The atmosphere hummed with a blend of curiosity, courtesy, and the undercurrent of tension whenever a southern monarch set foot in the north. They sat to talk, drinks in hand, the fire crackling. Sansa updated Daenerys on local matters, the harvest and the gift, the security of the wall's remnants, and the steady cleanup of villages ravaged by the White Walkers. Tyrion listened intently. Though the threat of the dead was long gone, the scars they left behind ran deep. Many families had lost fathers, mothers, children in that war. Entire hamlets still lay deserted. Jon explained how he had begun organizing hunts for the scattered pockets of undead animals, bears or wolves turned whites, that still roamed the remotest forests. "We've destroyed most," he said, "but now and then a rumor surfaces. We track them down. The North wants no reminder of that darkness." Daenerys nodded solemnly. "Your diligence is commendable. We must ensure no shadow of the dead lingers to haunt us." The conversation turned to less grim topics, such as prospects for trade between the North and the Crownlands. Sansa mentioned that northern ores and timber were plentiful provided the supply lines were safe. Daenerys offered favorable terms to encourage growth. Tyrion chimed in with specific numbers, ensuring that the taxes would be fair without draining the North's resources. It felt surreal to conduct these negotiations so calmly in the very hall where the Stark banner once stood alone in defiance of Southern kings. Yet times had changed. That evening ended on a polite note, each party retiring to their respective chambers. Tyrion, given a small but comfortable room, stood at the window for a time, gazing at the snowy courtyard. He could see the silhouettes of men patrolling the battlements, ever watchful. His breath fogged the glass. The last time he had been here, death had loomed on all sides. Now, life continued, births and harvests, commerce and trade. "This is what we fought for," he whispered to himself. "A chance at tomorrow." Over the following days, Daenerys, Jon, and Sansa convened with northern lords who traveled to Winterfell, curious to meet the queen or to renew ties with House Stark. The lords arrived with retinues, the Mormonts, the Serwins, the Glovers, the Umbers. Though the latter had been nearly wiped out, each meeting carried echoes of old suspicions about House Targaryen, about Lannisters in the north, about whether the realm's unity would last. Yet they marveled at the presence of the queen who had fought alongside them at the Battle of Winterfell, whose dragons had scorched whites by the hundreds. Tyrion observed how Daenerys balanced firmness with courtesy. She made no grand promises of forcing the North to bow in humiliation, rather, she offered them a place in a stable realm. Sansa, for her part, carried herself with an air of regal composure. When asked if she harbored ill will toward the south, she answered that peace was the best outcome for all. Tyrion knew well that Sansa's experiences had hardened her, taught her the value of reading people's intentions. He sensed that she watched Daenerys carefully, but so far found little reason to oppose her. The Northmen seemed reassured that their own Lady Stark did not openly contest the Queen's rule. Amid the political dance, moments of quiet camaraderie emerged. One chilly afternoon, Daenerys walked along Winterfell's battlements, scanning the snowy expanse beyond. Tyrion joined her, breath puffing in the cold. "I can see why Northerners are so proud of this land," Daenerys said, her voice carrying on the wind. "It's harsh, yet beautiful." Tyrion looked out at the endless white. "It has a raw honesty. Not like the glitter of King's Landing where everything hides behind a facade." She wrapped her cloak tighter. "If we can keep the North content, we might avert decades of rebellions. Sansa is key to that. So is Jon. And I trust them both at least enough to build upon." Tyrion nodded. "They trust you as well, especially now that you've listened to their concerns. Peace is built one conversation at a time, I suppose." She laughed softly. "You'd make a good poet, Lord Tyrion. One conversation at a time. If only the entire realm took that approach." They walked the circuit of the walls, discussing next steps for the realm's stability. Dorne would soon dispatch envoys to King's Landing. The Iron Islands under Yara had begun fortifying their coasts, but they appeared to accept Daenerys' rule so long as they governed themselves. Plans emerged to unify the realm's coinage system to ensure a standard measure of gold and silver across all 7 kingdoms. It was the kind of detail that would have bored a younger Tyrion, but now he relished it, knowing how crucial small things could be in preserving peace. After a week in Winterfell, the time came for Daenerys and her party to return south. They had assured Sansa that the crown valued the North's well-being and had gleaned promises of cooperation in trade and defense. A farewell feast was held in the Great Hall. The tables overflowed with roasted game, hearty stews, and flasks of strong northern ale. Lords and ladies mingled with the Queen's knights. Jon and Daenerys sat side by side, discussing the future. Music played, a lively tune that made some of the younger men and women tap their feet or dance in open spaces. Tyrion found himself near the hearth, a cup of wine in hand, speaking with Arya Stark. She had changed so much since the girl he remembered from King's Landing before the War of the Five Kings. A quiet intensity burned in her eyes, the eyes of someone who had survived horrors and learned skills beyond normal imagining. She asked him about the state of King's Landing, whether peace truly had a chance to last. He gave a measured shrug. "I think it does if we work at it. Cersei's in the Westerlands, presumably content to govern rather than scheme. Houses that used to be at each other's throats are now forced to rebuild side by side. There will always be trouble, but perhaps not open war." Arya studied him. "I hope so. We've all had enough bloodshed." A shadow flitted across her features. Tyrion guessed she was remembering her own list of names, the things she had done. He didn't pry. "You'll remain here with Sansa?" Arya nodded. "Winterfell is my home, though I come and go. I travel sometimes, see the realm. I like to know what's out there, make sure there are no threats waiting to creep up on us. If the Queen keeps her word, I won't stand in her way." He accepted that with a respectful tilt of his head. He had no doubt that if Daenerys ever turned cruel, Arya Stark would move decisively. But for now, all was calm. The next morning, the Queen's retinue departed. Snow fell lightly as they rode out, the northern banners fluttering in farewell. Sansa watched from atop the walls, her red hair rippling. Tyrion offered her one last nod from below, and she lifted a hand in a subdued gesture of parting. Returning to King's Landing was a slower journey, laden with the memory of the North's chilly hospitality. They stopped again at Riverrun, where Edmure Tully greeted them warmly, now more confident that the crown would respect his title. The Riverlands, battered by years of conflict, began to show subtle signs of life. More wagons on the roads, more villages with thatched roofs replaced. On the final stretch toward the capital, they encountered caravans of merchants transporting grain and fish, apparently bound for King's Landing's bustling markets. The realm was slowly stitching itself back together. When at last the city's walls rose before them, Tyrion felt a pang of relief and nostalgia. For all the Red Keep's dark corridors and haunted histories, it was the seat of power he now helped maintain. They entered through the gates to find the streets busy, the Queen's arrival drawing onlookers. Some cheered again, others simply stopped to stare. The gold cloaks, now better organized under the watchful eyes of Grey Worm and the city officers, maintained order. In the harbor, ships unloaded cargo from Essos and beyond, a sign that trade routes were flourishing. Jaime and the other council members waited in the Red Keep's courtyard, greeting Daenerys with bows and warm words. Tyrion immediately noticed Jaime's relaxed posture as though a burden had lifted in their absence. He came forward to clasp Tyrion's arm. "All's been quiet," Jaime reported. "No major disputes, no plots that I'm aware of. Cersei sent a raven confirming her safe arrival at Casterly Rock. She's overseeing repairs to the fortress. Apparently, Father let it fall into disrepair more than I realized." Tyrion smiled wryly. "He put his energy into controlling the realm, I suppose. Now, let Cersei rebuild. That's an occupation that might suit her, no wars to fight, just a seat to maintain." Daenerys dismounted, handing her reins to a waiting groom. She listened as Varys and Missandei updated her on messages from Dorne and the Iron Islands. Then she led them into the throne room. Tyrion followed, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The Iron Throne loomed ahead, no longer a menacing symbol of unstoppable power, but a seat for a ruler who had chosen unity over tyranny. Daenerys ascended its steps and turned to address those gathered, knights, courtiers, and officials. Her eyes shone with renewed resolve. "My lords, my ladies," she said, her voice carrying. "We have visited the North, and they stand with us in forging a lasting peace. The Riverlands pledged their support, as do the Westerlands under House Lannister. Dorne and the Iron Islands are in negotiations to affirm their allegiance. We have faced the darkest threats, human and otherwise, and emerged as one realm. Let us continue to build upon this alliance, ensuring that no single region or house ever again tears us apart." She paused, and a soft hush settled over the throne room. Then people began to applaud, a hesitant sound that swelled as more joined in. Tyrion glanced around, seeing genuine hope in some eyes, caution in others. But it was applause nonetheless. It had been many years since any occupant of the Iron Throne received applause without fear lacing the corners. Daenerys' gaze swept over the crowd. "The realm needs healers, builders, wise minds, and strong arms. We shall rebuild. And to that end, I declare that the taxes levied on those regions worst hit by the wars shall be reduced for the next 2 years, giving them space to recover. The crown will cover these costs by streamlining certain royal expenses. We invest in the future of our land so that no one starves or is forced into brigandage." Murmurs of surprise echoed. Reducing taxes was a bold move, risking the crown's coffers. Tyrion felt a stab of concern. Could they afford it? But he also recognized the brilliance. It would strengthen loyalty among the war-ravaged regions. It was a declaration that the queen truly cared more about her subjects than immediate gold. He stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Your Grace, if I might speak to the financial strategies." She gestured for him to continue. "Yes, Lord Tyrion. Please." He faced the assembled court. "Her Grace's plan is bold, but feasible if we encourage robust trade. I've spoken to merchants who are eager to move goods safely across Westeros now that the roads are not choked with armies. If the crown invests in rebuilding roads and ports, we can increase trade revenues. Wealth will flow in, offsetting the tax reductions for those hardest hit." Jaime added, stepping beside Tyrion, "House Lannister can help ensure the roads in the Westerlands are maintained. We still have mines producing gold. We can pledge some portion to the crown to assist during this period." There was a ripple of interest among the crowd. Seeing Jaime Lannister, once commander of the Kingsguard and brother to the deposed queen, now helping a Targaryen ruler, this signified true cooperation. Daenerys nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Lord Jaime. Your support is noted." After the session ended, a sense of cautious elation spread among those who had witnessed it. The queen had declared an act of mercy with her tax reforms, not an act of vengeance. Tyrion felt a slow building pride in the realm's progress. Not so long ago, they were all bracing for either a savage conquest or an endless wave of undead. Now, talk of rebuilding overshadowed talk of war. In the days that followed, Daenerys convened smaller councils to hammer out the details of these reforms. Tyrion guided the proposals, while Varys quietly moved behind the scenes to placate certain lords. Missandei organized the official announcements, ensuring they were spread across the 7 kingdoms by Raven. Grey Worm took on the task of bolstering the city's defenses, not out of fear of rebellion, but to discourage any opportunistic raids by pirates or would-be usurpers. Jaime, with a cadre of loyal knights, oversaw the training of new recruits for the city guard, emphasizing discipline and fairness. Occasional rumors cropped up, whispers of a discontented minor lord in the Vale who muttered that the Targaryen queen was a foreign usurper. Another rumor suggested that Euron Greyjoy, still unaccounted for, might be sailing the seas with A.H. handful of ships, possibly seeking to stir trouble. Yet none of these threats seemed insurmountable. The realm's mood had shifted from open conflict to cautious unity. If small fires flared, they could be extinguished before they raged. As the weeks turned into months, summer gained a firmer hold, warming the land. The fields outside King's Landing turned green, dotted with wildflowers. Shipments of grain and produce poured into the capital's markets, and the price of bread decreased. Tyrion saw commoners look less haunted, children running about the streets rather than cowering from rumors of war. Carpenters and masons arrived to repair shattered neighborhoods hired by the crown with coin from the carefully managed treasury. The Red Keep itself underwent modest refurbishments, shedding some of the gloom that had settled over it during Cersei's final months in power. News came that Yara Greyjoy had reopened trade lanes in the Narrow Sea. Dorne sent word that their new prince would arrive at King's Landing for formal recognition. Even storms off the coast seemed less threatening now that the realm was united in purpose. Yet Tyrion did not grow complacent. He knew the complacency birthed new threats in a place like Westeros. Still, for each day that passed without a major crisis, he breathed a little easier. One afternoon, as he strolled through the gardens that sloped behind the Red Keep, he happened upon Daenerys. She stood near a flowering tree, gazing out at the Blackwater Bay. The wind tugged strands of silver hair free from her braids. She turned at his approach, offering him a gentle smile. "It's beautiful," she said, gesturing to the blossoms. "I never expected King's Landing to have such pockets of calm." Tyrion nodded. "I remember when the gardens were overshadowed by fear, when any day could bring fresh chaos. Now it feels like we've earned a respite." She exhaled softly. "I think often of the day I arrived here with my dragons, expecting to conquer. The city's walls felt hostile, and I was prepared to do anything to claim the throne. Yet, if I had burned it all, what would I have ruled? A city of ash," Tyrion said quietly. "I'm glad you chose otherwise." She paused, reflecting. "It wasn't just me. It was Jon, your council, others. Even Cersei, in her own twisted way, contributed by accepting the truce. Sometimes I wonder if the threat of the undead scared us all into sense. Humans can do horrible things to one another, but faced with extinction, we change." Tyrion thought of the countless acts of cruelty that had shaped Westeros. Then he thought of the unexpected unity they had achieved. "We can still do horrible things," he said, "but perhaps we've learned enough to avoid them now. At least for a time." Daenerys reached out, brushing her fingers along a delicate bloom. "Time enough to rebuild, to let a generation grow up without the horrors of constant war. That is my hope." He studied her face. There was no hunger for destruction there, no lust for absolute power. Whatever else Daenerys Targaryen had become, she was not the tyrant some had feared. "People will sing songs of you," Tyrion said, "not as the Queen of Ashes, but as the one who brought unity after chaos. That is no small legacy." A small, wistful smile touched her lips. "I never cared much for songs about me. But if it means the realm prospers, I can endure a ballad or two." They stood in companionable silence, the wind carrying the fragrance of the garden and the salt of the bay. Tyrion let himself savor that moment. The swirling politics, the burdens of the realm, everything receded for an instant, leaving only two souls who had fought to save a land from doom and found a tentative peace. At length, Daenerys turned back toward the Red Keep. "Come, Lord Tyrion. We have letters to draft for Prince Martell of Dorne, and I suspect you'll want to carefully phrase them." He gave a mock bow. "Your wish is my command, your grace." They walked side by side, returning to the duties that shaped a kingdom. And so Westeros moved forward, each small step forging a path away from the nightmares of the past. Cersei's acceptance of peace had been the turning point, the chance they all seized to prevent one more devastating war. Now, through careful negotiations, mutual concessions, and a shared desire to avoid further bloodshed, they were remaking a realm often described as doomed to perpetual conflict. When Tyrion looked upon the Iron Throne these days, he did not see the twisted swords of subjugated foes. He saw, instead, a seat of possibilities where a queen chosen by a realm that had survived winter and death could nurture hope rather than fear. It was not perfect. Nothing in Westeros ever was. But for the first time in memory, the people dared to imagine a future shaped by cooperation, not endless strife. No one could say how long such harmony would last. Perhaps the children of this generation would one day face fresh threats. Yet for now, the living had triumphed and the Seven Kingdoms stood together, forging a peace that defied centuries of bloodshed. And Tyrion Lannister, once despised, once hunted, stood at the Queen's right hand, proud to have played a part in guiding them toward a tomorrow worth living in. A tomorrow that, at last, did not echo with the drumbeats of war, but with the quiet promise that humanity, battered but unbroken, could rise above even its darkest fears.